Have you ever stopped to think about how you do, well, anything? You decide to pick up a cup of coffee and your hand just does it. It feels instant, right? But what's really happening is this incredible, high-speed electrical drama unfolding inside your body. So let's pull back the curtain and take a look at the amazing electrical system that powers your every single thought and every move. Okay, so first things first, we've got to understand the network itself. We're going to start with the big picture, the whole system, and then we're going to zoom way, way down to the tiny single cell that makes it all happen. And this is it. This is your body's information superhighway, the nervous system. You've got your central commands, the brain and spinal cord, and then all these peripheral nerves branching out to every corner of your body. It controls literally everything, your heartbeat, your breathing, your most complex ideas. It is the ultimate command and control center. Now let's zoom in and meet the star of the show. The fundamental building block of this entire highway, the cell that does all the heavy lifting, is the neuron. This little guy is responsible for generating and firing off all those electrical signals that make everything in our bodies work. So, here's a question for you. What's a neuron doing when it's not sending a message? You might think it's just switched off, taking a break, but actually it's in this constant state of readiness, a quiet hum of potential energy, just waiting for the command to fire.
This state has a name. It's called the resting potential. And what that means is, even when it's just sitting there, there's a difference in the electrical charge between the inside and the outside of the neuron. And here's the key part. The inside of the cell is actually more negative than the outside.
This is honestly the perfect way to think about it. A neuron at rest is basically a tiny biological battery. It's fully charged, holding on to all this stored electrical energy, just waiting for the right moment to let it all go. And we can actually measure this. Scientists can stick tiny little electrodes inside and outside a resting neuron, and what they see on their screen at oscilloscope is this steady, flat line at about -70 millivolts. That number just confirms it. The inside is sitting at a negative charge compared to the outside. So how does the cell even charge this battery in the first place? Well, it's this really cool balancing act. First, you've got way more positive sodium ions on the outside and more positive potassium ions on the inside. Second, the cell's wall, its membrane, is a little leaky to potassium, so some of those positive ions sneak out, making the inside even more negative. And finally, you've got this little molecular engine, the sodium-potassium pump, that's constantly working, kicking sodium out and pulling potassium in to make sure that battery stays charged and ready to go. All right, now for the main event. What happens when that little battery finally gets the signal to discharge? Well, it unleashes this sudden, dramatic electrical explosion. This is the action potential. This is the spark. This is the signal. At its core, an action potential is just a lightning-fast, total flip-flop of that resting charge. For just a millisecond, the inside of the cell goes from being negative to being wildly positive. This electrical pulse is the fundamental piece of information in your entire nervous system. It's how your neurons talk. And this is what it looks like. When a neuron gets stimulated, the voltage doesn't just nudge up a little bit. No way. It absolutely rockets upward in this iconic, sharp spike. This shape is the electrical fingerprint of a neuron firing. And get this, at the very peak of that spike, the inside of the cell, which was chilling at -70 millivolts, briefly becomes intensely positive, hitting about plus 35 millivolts. That's a massive swing of over 100 millivolts, and it all happens in just a couple of thousandths of a second. So this whole spike has its own little story, its own life cycle. It all kicks off when a stimulus pushes the voltage to a tipping point, a trigger called the threshold, which is around -50 millivolts. Once you hit that, boom, depolarization happens, and the voltage shoots up. Then comes repolarization, the rapid fall back down, and finally, there's this little dip called hyperpolarization, where it briefly overshoots before settling back down to rest. And the key thing to get here is that this is an all-or-nothing event. It's like a light switch, not a dimmer. Little nudges, like S1 and S2 here, they don't do anything. But the second a stimulus is strong enough to hit that threshold, like S3, the neuron commits and fires a full-strength action potential every single time. It doesn't fire harder if the stimulus is bigger. It either fires completely or it doesn't fire at all. So you're probably wondering, what's the microscopic machinery that's making this incredible voltage swing happen so fast? The answer lies in these tiny molecular gates that are studded all over the neuron's membrane. Let's meet our two main players, voltage-gated sodium channels and voltage-gated potassium channels. Just think of them as tiny automatic doors that only open or close when the voltage around them changes. The sodium channels are the really fast ones, and the potassium channels are just a little bit slower to react. Okay, so here's how they dance together to create that spike. When the neuron is at rest, all the gates are closed. But when the threshold is hit, the fast sodium gates fly open, and a flood of positive sodium ions rush into the cell. That's what causes that massive spike up, the depolarization. Then, almost immediately, those sodium gates slam shut and the slower potassium gates finally open up. Now positive potassium ions rush out of the cell, bringing the voltage crashing back down during repolarization. Then everything just resets, ready for the next signal. Okay, so we've made a single spark, one action potential. That's great, but how does that signal actually travel from one end of a neuron to the other? I mean, some of these neurons are super long. It basically travels like a wave down the neuron's long arm, which is called an axon. This is a process called propagation. And it's so clever. The action potential at one spot on the axon triggers a brand new, identical action potential right next to it, which triggers the next one, and so on. This mechanism makes sure the signal never fades out. It's regenerated at full strength every single step of the way. The best way to picture this is like a line of dominoes falling. The nerve impulse isn't one thing that's physically moving down the axon. No, it's a chain reaction of action potentials, each one perfectly triggering the next, carrying that message flawlessly from point A to point B. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all these nerve impulses travel at the same speed. Your body actually has a slow lane and a high-speed express lane, and it all comes down to whether the axon has insulation or not. And you can see the difference right here. On the left, you've got an uninsulated or unmyelinated axon. It has to create a new action potential at every single point along the way. It's steady, but it's pretty slow. But on the right, many axons are wrapped in this fatty insulating layer called myelin. The signal can't form under the myelin, so it literally jumps from one gap in the insulation to the next. This jumping conduction is incredibly fast and way more efficient. And this insulation is so critical. In diseases like multiple sclerosis, the myelin gets damaged and this super fast communication starts to break down. Which leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. We just established that every action potential is an all-or-nothing event. They're all identical. So if the signal for a gentle touch is the exact same size as the signal for a painful burn, how in the world does your brain tell the difference? Well, that, as it turns out, is a whole other story about timing and frequency, and it's a perfect cliffhanger for another time.